things are looking up. Your business is growing. So what's your next step? A bigger office? A new supplier? Your next big contract overseas? Your business has growing needs. You'll need more support, more flexibility, more resources, and a bank that makes it their business to help expand your business. Welcome to Business Banking with HSBC. All our experience and expertise brought right to you so that you and your business can take the next step. You'll have support from a dedicated relationship manager and access to our global network of experts. The flexibility to manage your finances across multiple devices. International accounts all on one platform. And much more. So choose Business Banking with HSBC and take your next step.
Hello and welcome to the 7th Annual Indonesia Economic Forum. We have been hosting a live forum out of Jakarta for the past 3 days, and we have reached the final apex of the conference with a very, very exciting panel ahead of us. For those of you who have stayed with us for the last 3 days, thank you very much. I'm sure you are very happy that you stayed with us with the amazing content and speakers from across the world that have spoken at our forum over the past 3 days. This panel is really kind of to wrap up some of the discussions that have taken place, some of the ideas that have been presented, and some of the insights that we have gained. The panel is titled New Investment Trends, and really we are looking far ahead in terms of how the world is being reshaped. With COVID-19 shutting down economies around the world, global FDI flows have fallen by 49%, which is huge in the first half of 2020 compared to 2019. Many MNCs have held back investments due to heightened economic and business uncertainty. Such sluggish outlook has also impacted Indonesia, with the Investment Coordinating Board, BKPM, reporting that the country attracted about $14 billion in FDIs in the first half of 2020. This is the weakest half-year figure since 2012. Apart from a weak external environment, Indonesia has also suffered due to uncertain legal environment, excessive red tape, unfriendly labor laws, and infrastructure bottlenecks. Of course, some progress has been made on structural reforms with the passing of the new Omnibus Law on job creation. Investors have welcomed the law as it seeks to open up more sectors to foreign investments, reduce prohibitive payouts to workers, and simplify business licenses. We are now honored and privileged to have with us Mr. James Castle, the founder and chairman of Castle Asia. Jim, of course, is a very well-respected figure within the business community in Indonesia, both by the foreign business community as well as by the local business community. Jim, thank you for joining us. Can you hear us, Jim?
Yeah, you're coming in loud and clear.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've been in Japan for the past few months. You must be missing Indonesia and the nasi padang here.
You can see I don't have my batik with me. I didn't bring a batik. I didn't know I was going to stay this long. So anyway, yeah, I certainly do.
Right. Anyway, let's get started, Jim. I know you've been in Indonesia for a very long time. I won't mention the number of years, but a very long time.
Please don't.
And you've seen many ups and downs. You know, you were here during the '98 crisis. You've seen Indonesia come back. But of course, 2020 has been a year like no other in living memory, with the pandemic shutting down basically businesses and economies around the world. As you look at how 2021 is approaching from an investment point of view, from an investment perspective.
I've lost your voice, Shoeb, sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me, Jim?
Yeah,
Okay, I was just saying
yes,
that I was just saying that, 2020 has been a year like no other in living memory in terms of the global economic impact of COVID-19.
No, sorry, I'm losing you again.
Oh, Jim, can you hear us? Is it clear now?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I think your connection has dropped a bit.
No. No, I can't hear you now, Shoeb. It looks like everybody's frozen. I don't know if it's my screen or yours.
It is your screen, Jim. Everybody, yeah. Can you hear us?
Okay, let me try. Yeah, it's coming in and out though. Let me see. I apologize. Let me try something here.
Sure. Take your time.
Can you hear me, Shoeb?
I can hear you. I can hear you, but I think the feed on your side
is
not
why don't
so
I
strong.
get started with a few comments?
Okay, please go ahead. We can hear
Maybe
you.
if I'm going to stop my video, and maybe it'll be clearer, just the voice. So
Yes. Okay.
Can you still hear me?
Yes, I
okay,
can.
Good. Let's go from here. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you for the introduction, and sorry for the technical glitches. But I guess, first of all, happy Thanksgiving to my fellow Americans in the audience. And congratulations to you, Shoeb, and your team for a great couple of days. As you noted, we're certainly in a very challenging period right now, and struggling with the COVID restrictions are putting a strain on everybody, not just from a business sense, but from a personal sense. And sometimes that may affect our business judgment. So in all of this, Indonesia is trying to implement its most dramatic economic policy changes in 20 years. So let me make a couple of comments in response to the Omnibus bill. I'm not going to say too much because I know that Joel and Lin have been following it very closely, and I'm sure the other panelists have too. But let me just note that there is some very good things in it. The most important ones that I've noted are the more flexible industrial relations, the dismissal charges, reasons for dismissal have been expanded, severance pay has been reduced a bit, and they've eliminated some of the conditions that mandate a doubling of payments. So there is an improvement there in industrial relations from the employer's point of view and from regional competitiveness point of view. Equally important, there is a more open investment framework. Now foreign investment is only prohibited in 6 sectors. Otherwise, there are 3 categories as I understand it. I guess there's a lot to be fleshed out in the implementing regulations, but there are some sectors reserved for domestic investment. There are some sectors that are conditionally open to foreign investment, where there may be limitations on foreign ownership, et cetera. And most sectors are unconditionally open to foreign investment. To the extent this is true, this is a tremendous step forward. The other area which is a little more controversial is environmental safeguards. Now, some people are worried because Indonesia may be reducing environmental safeguards, but the government says it's only making compliance more simple. So if they can reduce some paperwork without reducing environmental protections, that will be a very good step forward. So let's see, there is some concern there that there might be some weaknesses there. But most important of all, the Omnibus bill, in my view, reflects, in the first time in all the time I've been in Indonesia, an honest assessment by the government that it's hitting below its weight, punching below its weight in the investment world. In other words, all the time I've been in Indonesia, it's been a good news strategy, do it our way, we're doing fine, and so on and so forth. Lin will probably remember early in the first Jokowi term when we had an AmCham investment summit, and one of the senior officials from the coordinating ministry was there, the economics coordinating ministry. And people were asking, well, in Vietnam, they do this, in Vietnam, they do that. Finally, he got angry and said, if you like Vietnam so much, go there. We do it this way in Indonesia. And this has been the attitude, basically, for so many years and reflected in the policy. the fact that the president himself is now saying we have to benchmark against our competitors. We're in a competitive world, competing for foreign investment. And so let's look at what other people are doing, with specific mention to Vietnam, who is competing, I should say, for a lot of the labor-intensive investment and doing better than Indonesia. So this is the most important thing, a recognition that Indonesia needs to compete, needs to compare its programs with other countries and decide how it wants to move forward. So I think that's very important. Into the economy itself now and some of the situations, I've been asked to talk about investment opportunities. And I think we get distracted a lot by two things. One, by the Omnibus bill, by competing for labor-intensive investment, because it's easy to be pessimistic, especially in the COVID environment. But I went back and checked, and UNCTAD did a very nice ASEAN investment report, which came out in 2019. And it's really gives us a snapshot of where we were, both Indonesia and Indonesia within ASEAN, leading up to when COVID came in early 2020. FDI in ASEAN had risen 5% to a record 155 billion in 2018, the third consecutive year of increase. And the ASEAN member states receiving higher inflows were at record levels: Cambodia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Vietnam. And they were diversified. So most of the manufacturing FDI came to Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. So we weren't as far out of the picture as we thought. Indonesia, in the 2016-18 period, saw a fourfold increase in foreign investment, FDI inflows. It reached a record of 22 billion. So when we say the first half of this year was the lowest in quite a while, it's because we were hitting some record numbers coming into this period. Let's see, manufacturing increased to 14 billion. Investment in wholesale and retail trade and grew 54% to 7 billion. And remember, Indonesia experienced outflows of over $6 billion in divestment in that period because of the forced divestment in mining and oil and gas activities of Total, Chevron, and Freeport. So we were swimming upstream in our net numbers there. Singapore is the single biggest investor into Indonesia, but most of this, in that period, I should say, more than China, according to the report, accounting for 48% of the total investment. Of course, much of that was third country investment coming in through investment vehicles in Singapore. In infrastructure, Indonesia was still receiving a significant amount of investment in power generation. The Cirebon Power Station was developed by a joint venture between Marubeni of Japan, Korea Midland Power, Setan of Korea, and Indika Energy of Indonesia. In 2018, the Power Construction Company of China started developing 5 hydropower facilities in North Kalimantan with about an $18 billion value. So that was going on. Meanwhile, often overlooked were retail and infrastructure activities related to real estate, where the main recipients, the main recipients in Indonesia came from the Asian retailers Latte of Korea, Family Mart of Japan, and Central of Thailand. They all were expanding in Indonesia. So the tax amnesty also brought back some Indonesian money that was registered as foreign investment, especially in real estate. In the digital world, we know 3 of the 4 largest unicorns in ASEAN are from Indonesia: Gojek, Tokopedia, Traveloka, and Lazada, and Bukalapak is 7th. In terms of e-commerce in ASEAN, it reached 23 billion in 2018. And over half of that was in Indonesia. And this e-commerce is expected to reach over 100 billion by 2025. And we all know that the COVID situation is actually accelerating e-commerce. Shoeb asked me to comment on FDI for the United States, and this is an interesting situation. In ASEAN, FDI for the United States dropped from 8 billion from 25 billion in 2017, a very sharp drop, but most of this was due to tax changes in the US, where the US changed the rules on overseas investment and taxation in tax havens like Singapore. So a number of investments in Singapore were restructured by the United States, leading to a sharp drop in FDI. Nevertheless, U.S. investment in this period in manufacturing actually increased in Indonesia, Singapore, and Thailand. In 2019, Cargill purchased a 30% stake in the Tropical Palm Holdings held by Temasek of Singapore, which owns plantations in Indonesia, is one example. We also know that during this period, Apple set up a research center in Indonesia. Now Google is investing in cloud services, and Microsoft has been very active here. So these are some of the areas where we've seen a lot of activity. And I'm responding to discussions we have in AmCham, discussions I have in my own business forum. People are a little pessimistic, and I think we've overlooked the dynamism that's been evident in Indonesia's investment climate, hitting about, I think, 20 billion. I think the BKPM gave some figures on the first day of the program, which said we were doing better in Indonesia as well. So I think we shouldn't be too pessimistic. We should see that a lot of people are taking advantage of the current situation. But some areas where there are real opportunities, and these areas are touched on by the Omnibus Bill. Services is, of course, a big area, and it doesn't necessarily lead to a lot of high value investment, but it's important in terms of the quality of the business environment. And two areas are healthcare and education. And the Omnibus Bill looks at opening up Indonesia more in both those areas. I think for those of us resident in Indonesia for a long time, medical tourism is always on our minds. And we see how much money Indonesians and others spend in Singapore and around the region. And that money could and should be spent in Indonesia. The UNCTAD report that I mentioned had some very interesting data on medical tourism. It noted that Singapore had about 540,000 medical tourists in 2011. That number was about the same in 2019. It didn't increase. But the big numbers were Malaysia, which had 600,000 in 2011, and that increased to 1,050,000 in 2019. Thailand went from 500,000 in 2011 to 2.4 million in 2019. Vietnam went from 0 to 80,000 in 2019. So all our ASEAN neighbors are opening up to medical tourism, and many of those, I know many Indonesians, particularly Muslim Indonesians, like to go to Malaysia for healthcare. Malaysia and Thailand offer lower cost alternatives with high quality to Singapore. So this is an area where now I think the government is finally paying some attention, both to provide high quality health care for Indonesians and high quality health care that will keep people on shore and even attract people from other areas. The other area is education. And this is a very sensitive area. And there finally have been some changes. It's basically been totally closed to foreign investment and foreign personnel forever. And now they're opening up a little bit. And this is very important because in another OECD report, their Program for International Student Assessment, their PISA report, Indonesian students, they study 15-year-olds for science, reading, and mathematics. Indonesian students are scored lower in 2018 than they did in 2015. And now Indonesia ranks 73rd in math, 74th in reading, and 71st in science. So when we look at Indonesia's competitiveness, yes, labor regulations are a problem, but human resources are also a problem, high quality human resources. We note that Indonesia's expatriate policy has been to reduce the number of expatriates. This is we're not talking about blue collar workers, we're talking about technology people, skilled executives. And basically the philosophy has been that foreign workers, foreign executives take jobs from Indonesians. But in fact, one of the biggest importers of foreign talent is the United States. If you look at the United States, foreign CEOs, foreign-born CEOs, run many of America's largest corporations, including high-tech corporations. So I think a smart industrial policy would be to double or triple the number of expatriates in senior positions rather than to reduce them to help expand the economy. In other words, Indonesia is drawing its executive pool from its population of 270 million, 260 million, where many other countries are drawing their executive pool from the whole world. It's not a fair fight. So we have to look at that. This is not a criticism of Indonesian executives. We all know that if there's the ones that have the education and training and opportunity are competitive anywhere and work in Indonesia and around the world. But it's the question of volumes, and the Indonesian education system is just not turning out an adequate number of educated individuals, and that's not just in the STEM subjects, but also in general education. The Indonesian labor force is really not that well educated compared to some of its regional peers, and that hurts productivity, I should say. So these are a number of areas that are being touched on. Bottom line is we're moving in the right direction. President Jokowi and his team with the Omnibus program is recognizing and trying to tackle some of the deficiencies that have held Indonesia back. Unfortunately, they were distracted by COVID, which also created a political situation, which people are taking some opportunities with, and some of the resistance to the Omnibus bill is really a disguised attack on Jokowi and a strategy for 2024, not looking at the quality or content of the Omnibus bill. But change is difficult. Change is difficult. There's a lot of entrenched resistance, and the real test of the Omnibus bill will come see how the bureaucracy adapts to it and see if they adjust to it. And we do have a more flexible and a less cumbersome bureaucracy in Indonesia. So there's a great deal of opportunities. I think the real message I'd like here is that the COVID is a tremendous challenge on top of all the other challenges. It's distracted us from some of our just basic businesses, but it also has created new opportunities, new ways to do things. I think many of us will be looking at totally different office environments even when COVID is gone. We'll be more efficient. We'll be more in the info tech area, getting a maximum productivity, better productivity out of our services and so on. So there's a lot of things that will come out of this, lessons to be learned. In the meantime, let's not forget that although Indonesia will contract this year, it's still $1 trillion economy. There's a lot going on from infrastructure, services, and so on. Yes, some of our businesses have contracted a bit, but we've also tried to adjust on the expense side. So the bottom line, it's a big economy. It's moving forward. It will slow down this year to somewhere in the 4%. Should contract to below 1 or maybe 2%. Should stabilize next year. I think it will take a little longer to come back than people would like. I think one of our speakers on day one said it would be a couple of years before a full-scale inoculation program could be implemented in Indonesia when we have the vaccine and so on. These will slow things down, but I think Indonesia will get back on the growth track next year, and we will continue to move forward. Remember, we've contracted less than most countries. We still have a fairly stable financial situation. We have excellent financial management. And so I think we're in a good position to come out of this COVID in reasonable shape and then to continue to move forward and build on some of the reforms that the government's been trying to put in place and will be trying to put in place over the next month. So why don't I stop there and we can start our discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jim. Can you hear us clearly? Jim, can you hear us? No, I don't think so. Anyway.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. Well, thank you for that, I think, broad and very sharp perspective. You know, it really I mean, you looked at a glass half full, while a lot of foreign investors are looking at things half empty. Indonesia has always been very resilient, and I think this COVID-19 pandemic has also shown its resilience. In terms of the foreign investor perception of Indonesia, you mentioned that, you know, I think structural reforms, for example, are pushing ahead for the first time in a very long while. The government under Pak Jokowi really is grappling.
I'm sorry, Shoeb.
Can you hear me?
I've lost you again. I'm going to try. No, I've lost you again halfway through. I apologize. I'm going to try and connect on my iPhone. Maybe the audio will be better on that.
Okay, no worries. No worries. Maybe we can bring in the other panelists while we wait for Jim to come on. Lin Neumann from Castle Asia, from AmCham Indonesia. Hi, Lin. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Don't tell Jim I've gone to work for him. He's going to have to start paying me.
I thought he was.
I'll send him a bill.
Yeah. Thank you very much for joining us. I think, you know, following up on what some of the points that Jim raised in where Indonesia is today vis-a-vis the foreign investor perception of Indonesia, from the American business community's you know, position and perspective, where does Indonesia, do they see the Omnibus Bill as a major game changer? Do they see Indonesia moving in the right direction, maybe not fast enough? You know, are they willing to bet the dollar on Indonesia again?
Well, you know, Indonesia is a complicated place, and I don't hear very many companies saying, "Oh, now we're going to invest in Indonesia because they passed the Omnibus Law." Companies who are already operating in Indonesia are pleased with the labor changes, the more rational approach to minimum wage, cutting red tape. The tax changes are helpful. There's a lot of great stuff in there. But I think still if I were to take the half empty position, the bureaucracy remains very cumbersome and still remains quite siloed when you get below Eselon 1 and get down into Eselon 2, 3, et cetera. You start to get a lot of the entrenched behaviors that are not quite helpful. You still have a legal system that nobody in the right mind wants to go to court in Indonesia. We all know that. One of the reasons that Singapore, I see Joel Shen here, one of the reasons Singapore is the biggest investor in Indonesia is because so few companies will set up headquarters in Indonesia. Why? Because Singapore has a working legal system and they're afraid to set up and take those risks in Indonesia. So these are things that continue to plague investor confidence. A couple of things though are going on that I'm supposed to be writing an op-ed about this currently, but one of the things that, and I picked this up from also what Jim said, one of the things that I do think is quite significant is the attitudinal approach and change in the Jokowi administration. This really does make a lot of sense. We're finally I'm getting more calls for meetings and dialogues with the government, with government officials than we've ever gotten before. And there's a genuine desire to get more US investment. And I think the same goes for investment from whether it's India or Singapore or anyplace else. This is a real thing. And I think it's a good thing. Sadly, Indonesia is going to have to recover from the black eye that it gave itself over the years on how it handled foreign executives on natural resource policy, especially in energy, which continues to be a problem with so many of these local content laws, the idea that you can force companies to invest by telling them they have to have 60% of something made in Indonesia. Most companies don't want to do that. But those mandates are still coming forward in places like pharmaceuticals, where companies do want to invest, but they want to invest on terms that make business sense to them. So I would say that, in answer to your question, I think Jim is right to look at it as half full. I think that's the right approach. We're feeling much more optimistic, most of our companies in AmCham, if you separate that from the natural resource sector, which is still problematic. And we have had some really good investments coming in. The Air Products, the big U.S. chemicals company, is investing a couple of $1 billion up in Kalimantan in a coal gasification plant that fits perfectly with the methane demand for biodiesel. A great investment. I was really pleased to see Kimberly Clark and their acquisition of Softex, which brings a big American player with good technology and sophistication into the market, takes over a great Indonesian brand, and that will just grow. I think that's a great sign to me that whoever, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but whoever approved that didn't worry about an American company coming in and taking over an Indonesian company. They saw a great company coming in to take over an Indonesian company that wanted that was on the market, and it's worked out, and I think that's a great sign. If we see more deals like that, then I think we're going to be in good shape. And the Omnibus Law is part of it. So are the way the special economic zones are going to be managed, and other things. And finally, of course, education and healthcare. Come on, guys, let's let the foreign investors in.
Yeah.
Anyway. That's short. That's my long-winded answer to a short question.
Well, thank you very much, Lin. I think the key point that Jim raised, and I think you have touched on and enhanced, is really the attitudinal change within the government, especially in the higher echelons of the government, within the ministries, within the cabinet. If I may come to you, George, at IABC, you are an Indonesian. You've been in Indonesia for a long time. You have very strong links with Australian business community, and of course, very strong links within the Indonesian business community. I think you are also in the Indonesian Chamber of Business of Industry, Kadin. How do you see this change? Does it have legs? Will it last? Well, the question is, will it last beyond Jokowi?
Yes, well, thank you, Pak Shoeb, and thank you for inviting me to this very distinguished panel. And I'll give a flow of things. I'll continue the points that Pak James Castle and Pak Lin, Lin from AmCham shared with us today. Now, obviously, the Indonesian Australian Business Council is a council where its members are Indonesian and Australian businesses, including Indonesian and Australian joint ventures. And our members are very dedicated to and they've invested their resources into the economic development of Indonesia. And so our perspective from this angle obviously is unique. Because if I can share with you also the construct of IABC, or the Indonesian Australian Business Council, is within its bylaws is that the national president is an Indonesian. So I'm an Indonesian, so probably my angle of looking at things, or my perspectives, comes from that perspective also. So from a perspective of what has been shared by James Castle and Pak Lin, is I think the points made are fair points. Those are fair points, and a lot of the challenges that were shared, this is our homework. That's our homework in Indonesia, to work on these matters. But I am also an optimist, and I see 2021 very optimistically, and in areas that were just mentioned also here. I see movement. Obviously, the digital economy. I see the movements, the traffic from Australia to Indonesia. the investment traffic, the, you might say, collaboration or consortiums between American, Australian companies coming into Indonesia, into that digital economy. And the investments are increasing. So companies that are Australian investments, like in e-commerce, they're increasing their investments. So the digital economy, I would say, is hot. There's challenges, and there's challenges everywhere, but that's a landscape that I would say is hot, and it could be because the president himself, Joko Widodo, is banking on that digital economy for the national economic recovery. That's why you see the push to develop or to bring in micro businesses and small business into the digital economy. So that will be a 2021 perspective that could be very interesting to look into. Education is interesting. Now, I'm in the education sector. I also vice chair the Association of Private Universities, which is 80% of Indonesia's higher education sector, our member base. And in this context, we are surprised, actually. In March, we thought, oh, it's over. COVID, no face-to-face. We're all going to go belly up. But apparently, to our surprise, actually the sector is surviving and it's growing. So it's one of the few sectors in Indonesian economic contraction that actually has a net positive, that's growing. And so and there's going to be serious deregulation in that sector. We were having a conversation, I think, in the earlier panel regarding education, and that deregulation is due to two things. It was the trend. It was the trend, and secondly, COVID sort of put it on steroids. And so what you see now is companies coming into that space or providers coming into that space, like education technology. That's a space that's going to be really vibrant, I think. And because the Minister of Education himself has said 2 weeks ago, for higher education, online is permanent. So that means you're deconstructing the whole accreditation process. And that will answer the question that Pak James Castle and Pak Lin has just shared with us, that how, that sector will, you might say, quote unquote, open up, you see. Because once you deregulate the accreditation process, then it becomes a different ball game. And from the private educator providers, we are very happy to respond to that opportunity, because that relates to capital inflows. And so obviously from an Australian perspective, Monash University is the icebreaker. They have the license to set up a full-blown international university in Indonesia, which is Monash University Indonesia. And I think from the conversation we had in the panel prior with you, Pak Shoeb,
yes,
is that they're going to be, pretty much, they're already recruiting lecturers, and they're going to be registering students very soon for master's and PhD in a very specific space, in that knowledge economy space, industrial revolution 4.0 space, data science and whatnot. And that leads to the third factor, related to what Pak James Castle said, that Indonesia needs to build its services sector. And building that services sector from contribution of 40% to GDP now to become a developed country, which is, on average, services sector is 70%. That is where this element of education plays in. And we can see that ecosystem starting to develop. So that would be a very attractive investment trend to look into. Now, the fourth is health. Now, health, I think, I understand the challenges with that, but there are there are trends of people beginning to invest. Just about last week, Aspen Medical from Australia announced that they're going to invest 1.3 billion in Indonesia, especially in the West Java, for development of hospitals and clinics and whatnot. So you see that attraction is there. And you see the trends are getting there. Now, Pat James mentioned about infrastructure. To be honest with you, I was surprised, but infrastructure is still going. A mutual friend of ours, Professor Dr. Danang Parikesit, Pak Shoeb, who's the chairman of the regulatory body that oversees tollways. Right? We just saw in where I'm from. I'm coming from Yogyakarta. And just 2 announcements of new tollways being developed from Yogyakarta to Bawen, and then Yogyakarta to Semarang. And so you see those announcements, and I asked him, "Well, Professor, infrastructure is still going." He said, "Not a single project that they have procured has failed in terms of the procurements. So there's always somebody willing to buy the project, and so this is very interesting. I mean, I was surprised. I mean, during COVID, you figure that will take a hit. So, fourthly, I think what Pat Lin said is very good. Yeah, I mean, the Kimberly Clark Softex acquisition, that was very encouraging for Indonesians, and I think we were all encouraged to see that transaction happen, because that sort of justifies the trends that are moving, where Indonesia is becoming an alternative investment attraction. Yeah. And so in that matter, if you look at strategic industry, for example, with Australia, the conversation within the Indonesian-Australian Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement which was entered into force on the 5th of July, a very strategic bilateral agreement. One element is development of electrical batteries for electrical vehicles. You're combining the lithium, nickel, and all that stuff. And so, there was a conversation already on that last week that I shared with our Australian friends and the Indonesian government. So you see that development happening, and that makes me optimistic. I talked to investment bankers, to VCs. I mean, a good friend of mine, Philip Kerkoven from Singapore. He runs a wealth management fund, and he's telling me the global glut of investments are looking at Indonesia as a place to place. The question is where to place it, and obviously the country risk, sovereign risk. Those are factors that come into play. But strategically, where to place it, and this disruption of COVID-19, I think, creates a new environment and a new landscape that those who can see where that niche is, the reward will be there. So obviously, I fully agree with our previous panelists, and I understand their perspectives. And I think that in ending, I would have to say that again, Indonesia for 2021, I'm quite optimistic that we will have a rebound, and we will have a strong rebound. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak George. I think, again, for that very positive sharing of where the Australian business community is vis-a-vis Indonesia. I think we are right, really. When you look at Indonesia, you don't look at a monolith. Although, of course, you have to look at the country as a whole. But within the economy, there are some very fast-growing sectors. I think, Pak George, you mentioned the digital sector, edutech, health tech. This morning we had a panel on the higher education sector. Joel, if I may bring you in, Singapore investors have always been very strong among the top investors in Indonesia for many, many years. Whether that money is Singaporean money or money coming through Singapore, Singapore has always played kind of a benchmark or kind of a litmus test for foreign investors coming into Indonesia. From your position as the Vice Chairman of the Singapore Chamber, and of course you're a lawyer, you see deals, you handle deals coming through. What is the perception of Indonesia today? Is the perception that Indonesia is finally again open to business? With the Omnibus Law and with this new attitude that they really want to get going and want to engage. Do you see that? And what is the perception from the Singapore business community?
Thank you very much, Pak Shoeb. It's a pleasure to be here and to be featured on the same panel as these illustrious gentlemen. A couple of comments and perhaps data points to set the stage for the discussion. I think, I broadly agree with what Pak James and Pak Lin and Pak George have shared before. A couple of things. Singapore is often touted, of course, as being the largest source of foreign direct investment for Indonesia. But as you pointed out, that's not to say that the money comes from Singapore. I think one of the reasons for that is because the money it's that the money comes through Singapore. Much of it's Indonesian money. all the reasons that
back.
I think that Lin mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Recycle back Indonesian money coming recycled back in Indonesia.
You know, we've got a. That's right. That's quite quite right. You know, Singapore's a jurisdiction that you know, where it's relatively easy to set up to do business. We've got high levels of transparency. You know, we rank consistently highly in studies on rule of law and ease of doing business. We've got legal institutions like courts and arbitration centers that work. You know, a jurisdiction where we're seen as low risk for businesses into the region, including into Indonesia. The other point I would note is there is a lot of hype around the Omnibus Law. I'm not sure how many of us have actually read all 1,184 pages or whatever it is of the Omnibus Law. I certainly haven't. I've got a team of guys in Jakarta doing that. But I think their report to me is, look, all of the Omnibus Law, practically all of the Omnibus Law is subject to implementing regulations. And you know, being seasoned observers and seasoned veterans of Indonesia, I think you know, those of us on this panel might have might be forgiven for having a small you know, for having some skepticism of the implementation process. You know, some analysts are quite bullish about the Omnibus Law. I think it was Fitch who came out with the most effusive comment that the Omnibus Law represented a significant enhancement of the business climate and a big step forward for labor market flexibility. Others, I think, are slightly more skeptical, and they talk about Indonesia's checkered record of implementing regulations in the past, and they urge for us to have a more tempered expectation of what the omnibus of the actual effects of the Omnibus Law. You know, having said that, though, I do agree with James that it's a strong and an unequivocal signal to the world that Indonesia is open for business. I don't think anybody expects it to be a magic bullet, you know, that cures all of Indonesia's ills, but it is a strong message to the world, and you know, one that comes from the highest levels of government, that Indonesia is open for business. So you know, I find that very, very encouraging indeed. A couple more data points that I'd like to share with this panel. Quite a lot's been said by James and Lin and George about the digital economy of Indonesia, and I think everyone who's here and investing in tech, which is a sector that's near and dear to my heart. I'm a tech lawyer, as you know, about Shoeb, and I pretend to be a venture capitalist from time to time as well. I certainly do advise venture capitalists. Everyone who's here and investing in tech in Southeast Asia have read that brilliant report prepared by Temasek and Google and Bain that predicts that the Indonesian economy worth about $44 billion today. And you know, not very long ago, only $8 billion, I believe, in 2015, when the report was first published, worth $44 billion today, will expand to $124 billion by 2025. So that's a almost 5x increase in as many years. COVID-19, as James and Lin have pointed out, has accelerated digital adoption, not just by consumers, but by Indonesian businesses as well. Significantly, MSMEs, who make up the bulk of Indonesian businesses. In that same report by Temasek and Google, they stated that 30%, I think, of digital, of users of digital products, 30% are new users who only started using these digital products as a result of COVID-19 or in response to COVID-19. George earlier mentioned venture capital investing heavily into Indonesia. A couple more data points to share on venture capital. We're seeing, you know, no decline in the, you know, either the frequency or the volume or the size of venture capital investments in Southeast Asia generally and in Indonesia in particular. One of the reasons for that is because venture capitalists are sitting on large amounts of dry powder. The last 3 years prior to COVID-19 have been record fundraising years for VCs. And I think at the beginning of this year, Southeast Asian focused venture capital investors had about close to $6 billion of dry powder, and they were in the market. 75 VC funds were in the market to raise $8.5 billion. And by June this year, they had already commitments for about a third of that. So even if they got to a fraction of what they were raising, we're still looking at, something like $10 billion that needs to be deployed in Southeast Asia over the next 5 or 6 years. Because assuming that the typical life of fund is, anything between 8 to 10 years, that's it's an eye-watering amount of money. Much of that is going to be deployed in Indonesia. Many of the studies this year in venture capital investments have observed that there's a spike in earlier stage deals, which means investors are taking bigger risks on companies and investing earlier on in the life cycle of a company. Many of these reports have also lamented the shortage or the dearth of large blockbuster investments, at least until last week, where in the span of a week, Gojek, Tokopedia, and Link Aja all announced milestone investments, I think to the tune of nine digits each. Link Aja announced a $100 million investment by Grab. Gojek announced a $150 million investment by Telkom, and Tokopedia didn't disclose the amount they raised, but I think, but did say that it was Google and Temasek that invested in them. So we're definitely seeing significant interest in this sector, which continues to grow at an alarming rate, right? There really isn't very much more for me to share, really. I would echo my other panelists, I suppose, enthusiasm for Indonesia, and say that it's from a Singapore point of view, not just as investors on our own behalf, but also as the world's gateway into Indonesia. We're certainly very bullish about Indonesia, and in particular about the digital sector that everyone's very excited about.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I think yes, definitely your insights into where the smart money, basically venture capital money, is going into is really into the digital sector, and Indonesia does have, I think, the largest number of unicorns, and in fact a decacorn in ASEAN, and that I think reflects the dynamism and the opportunities available within a certain segment of the Indonesian economy. Ambassador Gurjit Singh, if I may come to you now. You served as an ambassador to Indonesia some time ago, and then you've served also in many other countries. You're back in India now. How does India look at Indonesia? What is the Indian perspective? Indian companies have not really been at the forefront of investments into Indonesia, but now they're starting to come in. What is your view from where you sit in terms of opportunities and investment trends flowing eastwards from India's perspective?
Thank you, Shoeb. It's good to see you again and see so many very well-informed people from whom I've learned so much in this session. If the Indonesian government is facing great protests against the Omnibus Law, that means they are finally getting something right for the business community. Invariably, these reforms on the economic side and political protests in democracy go together. In India, we have seen that too. So I think steps in the right direction. Secondly, yesterday, I think the Indian business community in Indonesia had a meeting with BKPM to address some of the issues which they hope the Omnibus Law would cover, but which have been persistent drags on Indian investment and trade with Indonesia from my time, and that's a good 5 years ago. Third, I did not hear any of the panelists today mention RCEP. So I'm so happy. Otherwise, this RCEP bill is hung around India's neck as if we have missed the boat. But I tell you guys, without India in RCEP, you don't have a market to go to anymore. You are going to miss us over there. And I'm sorry that Indonesia didn't do enough to keep us in there. We really depended on you to sort things out. You didn't play your part. Now, this not playing your part, Shoeb, is something that Indonesia is guilty about where India is concerned. The India-Indonesia trade is about $20 billion. And Indonesia is our second largest trading partner in ASEAN after Singapore. But Singapore is not real trade, it's entry port trade. So the real biggest trading partner for us is Indonesia. And out of the 20 billion, 15 billion is Indonesian exports to India. India exports only 5 billion. And this is because we don't know, our businessmen don't seem to know how to take advantage of FTAs. So since you don't understand them, you condemn them. That is what really happens in India where FTAs are concerned. But having said that, when the India-ASEAN FTA was signed, the CLMV countries had the opportunity to delay implementation. But among the other 6 countries, the worst offers were by Indonesia, 44% only. So Indonesia has always tried to see India a competitor and not as a collaborator. But today, when countries are reviewing their security and seeing that national security is now not with any one camp, but looks for new opportunities, they also look for new resilient value chains. And that is where I think India and Indonesia have new post-COVID opportunities, particularly with Australia as a trilateral. Now, Australia has woken up to signing a CEPA with Indonesia. And after years of dragging their feet, they are now strategically approaching India for an FTA and a CEPA. So, RCEP or no RCEP, India has an FTA with ASEAN, with Japan, with Korea, and very soon with Australia. So it's only the Chinese which we are keeping out. The rest of you, we will keep working. And the whole concept of resilient value chains means that there are things we need to do together. So now, what is it that we need to do together? First, I think pharmaceuticals and the entire medical resilient supply chain. There's already an Indian investment in Samarang, which I think produces HIV/AIDS drugs. There need to be many more of these. But I think, as Mr. Neumann, I think, said, that in some cases, Indonesia companies have to understand that other companies have a way of doing things. Now, in Indonesia, there is no compulsion to have a joint venture to invest in Indonesia. Except Indian companies are told in pharmaceuticals, you must have a joint venture. Now, this has serious issues because, after all, the investment is not coming only for Indonesia, though you are a large market. It is going to be used for exports in the ASEAN economic community. And now that you are so proudly members of RCEP into larger RCEP, so you are the gateway. Like Singapore was the services gateway, Indonesia can be the manufacturing gateway where Indian and Indonesian companies can work together. But for pharmaceuticals, I think you need to be a little more open and let Indian companies come in and invest. And then you see how the joint ventures come later, not as a precondition. Joint ventures can, however, work much, much better in the area of infrastructure, which has been mentioned today, but not so much. I think with your construction strengths, Indian consulting and technology strengths, we can work much better in many ASEAN countries. And there is $1 billion line of credit from India, low-cost finance, available for Indian companies to work in ASEAN countries. And if we do it with Indonesian companies, I think it can be a win-win arrangement all over in the ASEAN. In the third segment, I would come to the entire sector of services. In the India-ASEAN FTA, the biggest drag that the ASEAN countries did was on services, to the extent that they signed the FTA on goods in 2007, but the one on services and investment in 2012. And on this, there's still not much action. And if you want to know one of the reasons why India was dissatisfied with RCEP, from the ASEAN point of view, was the lack of access on services and investment. So that is where we need to work together. Now, I don't think it's worthwhile trying to say, okay, let me reform the whole of ASEAN. Forget it. Let me work with possibly India's best partners, Singapore and Indonesia. Because you are like twin brothers. You work together in many ways, as our colleague has explained. So I think in the area of services, a Singapore, India, and Indonesia partnership, also in Australia, I've heard our colleague mention hospitals, education. These are the areas of Indian strength. We can come together and give Indonesia something really good. And the Indonesians, everybody talks about oil, gas, coal, blah, blah. But do you realize that the best resources of Indonesia live there, are not under the ground? And it is that human resource that we need to look at, and that is where services must look. With those few words, I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I think, again, you've given another fresh perspective. Indonesia really is a land of great opportunity. I think from all the panelists having spoken, everybody sees opportunity, which I think is a starting point amongst all the various countries coming into Indonesia. Can I go back to Jim? Jim, are you still there? Jim, can you hear us?
Yep, still here.
Oh, great. Did you follow the discussion?
Yeah.
So I think there's an interesting point and a trend emerging where the investments coming into Indonesia really are moving away from natural resources towards services. And really the services sector is poised to grow very quickly going forward. What's your perspective on that? Not just from the American perspective, but global investors looking at Indonesia, looking at ASEAN. Can us, as Ambassador Gurjit also mentioned, that Indonesia could be the manufacturing gateway for RCEP now, and of course for ASEAN. Do investors see that too?
Well, I think those are very good observations, and definitely services are the future. I think several of the ambassador pointed it out. I think George also pointed it out. Really, and what we're seeing, where we're seeing Indonesia move quickly is in the new sectors, which are not well regulated and not overly regulated, I should say, and they don't. There's not much presence of state-owned enterprises, and this is not a coincidence. This is what has held Indonesia back in the manufacturing space. It's held it back in the infrastructure space. It's one reason Indonesia doesn't have large private sector construction companies and so on. So the areas that are moving quickly are the ones that are furthest from the SOEs. And I think that's a fact that has to be stated. The SOEs are a burden on Indonesia. They serve a social purpose, and that has to be defined and I think more clearly discussed and articulated in general society. But what we're seeing, the services, because they don't have big capital, they're not interesting to government, they don't need government. And this is where education is so important, because services only takes one or two smart people. And that's where education comes in. So I think we really are on the right track by opening up the services more, by opening up education and healthcare, which are fundamentally, you need an intelligent, healthy people, really, to have a successful economy. And to the extent that foreign investment can accelerate that movement, Indonesia benefits greatly. So I hope we can stay away from this emotional old-fashioned, too many foreigners taking advantage of Indonesia, and look at the contribution that global finance and that global skills and global personnel can give to any country. No country can go it alone in today's world. All the large economies are attracting more and more foreigners to work in the key sectors. So I think Indonesia, if it can relax with the confidence that however big the foreign sector gets, it's still a small sector in a big economy. And however many foreign expats we have working in technical areas, working in management areas, there's still a small portion, and we all learn from each other. So I think if we can do that, we can really, Indonesia can accelerate, because it will grow at 4 to 5%, I think, for once we return to more normal economic circumstances. But it won't reach the 6-7% potential that is there, and it's still there. Unless it really develops its human resources, mobilizes capital in a more productive way, and helps everybody move forward. So I think we've touched on a couple of very good areas. And again, I'm very impressed that this government, the first government in the 40 years I've been in Indonesia, that's really said we have to compete. Our education is substandard. Our healthcare is substandard. We need investment. We benefit from investment. It benefits all Indonesians. So I think this is a very encouraging sign. I hope we can avoid all the political noise that these sentiments sometimes generate. And I hope the government works on its communication skills and doesn't just send messages and say, we figured it out, here's a good way to do it. They need to communicate better how these things benefit the majority of Indonesians. If they can do that, we can really move forward at a greater pace, recover from COVID as quickly as possible, and then get back on a much better track. So I'm very, very encouraged by the discussion today. I'm very encouraged by many of the things that the government's doing.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I think the Jokowi government has actually many times surprised us, right? Initially, when he first came in, everybody thought that he would be a lame duck president, in the sense that he would be cobbled by the PDIP and Megawati, but he showed himself to be a man that could stand his own ground. And now, in his second term, he's really opening up again. And like you said, there's an appreciation of the problems and the weakness within the Indonesian system and the economy. I want to move on a little bit here. Something that has been buzzing around over the past few days, and I'd like to get the views of the panel on this, and maybe starting with Jim, is the issue of the sovereign fund again. Indonesia wants to launch I think it's a $2 billion sovereign fund, and is looking for investors to come into the sovereign fund. And from what I understand, it would be invested in SOEs, but you just mentioned the SOEs are a drag. Should the government actually kind of, stay away from these things? Because it's distractive. And I don't know, there's not much confidence in them actually having a well-run sovereign fund.
It's called a sovereign wealth fund, but that's a brand. They're using it as a brand name. It's a new function for a sovereign wealth fund. Initially, these were things where countries like Norway that had excess capital used it to invest in basically capital markets and bonds around the world. It was a grand savings fund. It wasn't to invest and spend in infrastructure. This is a development fund, and people who invest in it will see that, and it's just a question if the Indonesian government can offer the terms, the conditions, and the confidence that this money is an investment. Because historically, government investment in infrastructure has been what we call a loss leader.
Yes.
It doesn't generate enough money to pay for it directly by fees, but if you build a road, it's good for society. Whether people pay back user fees and so on is a different question, but it helps society. So this won't work for a sovereign wealth fund. They're going to look at it. If they're investors, if it's not an aid program, if it's really an investment program, then they're going to look at the return. And the problem with this kind of investment in infrastructure is you have foreign currency and domestic rupiah revenue. So unless you get some kind of a currency guarantee or a currency, take a currency insurance, there's a lot of risk involved. This happened, of course, with the IPPs, the independent power producers, in 1998. It was one thing to pay 8 cents a kilowatt hour when the rupiah was 2,000 to the dollar. It was another thing when the rupiah was 14,000 to the dollar. And this is why Indonesia has not been able to get too much private investment, foreign private investment infrastructure because of the currency mismatch. So the fund is going to run into this difficulty, and how they deal with it, I'm not sure, but it's not a sovereign wealth fund in the traditional sense. It's really an investment fund in domestic infrastructure. And I think a lot of the countries that have stood up to say they're in so far, it's more of a political statement than an economic statement. So we'll have to see what the real terms and conditions are, how the money flows, and most importantly, what kind of transparency the process will have. Right. Because this will be, again, if it's not an aid program, then we're going to have some interesting developments. So I'm a little bit concerned that it's been overhyped and it's a lot more difficult to implement, I think, than we'd like to believe.
Right. Thank you for that. I think, but George, if I may come to you on the same point, you have a better, you have quite a good understanding of how the government here works and what is the thinking within the government. Who's going to run this fund? Or who's going to manage it? Would it be the Ministry of Finance? Would it be a separate body?
Okay, so Shoeb, I'll answer that question on my personal view. Yeah.
Yes.
But obviously, I am on the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I chair the Australian and New Zealand Bilateral Committee. So I see the movements going on and what the concepts behind it are. Now, I'm a private sector guy, right? I'm an entrepreneur. And I was involved in an infrastructure project providing seed capital to the new Jogja airport. Now, that was way back 15 years ago. You can imagine 15 years ago, we already developed the seed capital. That was private, and that was a European private consortium. But in the end of the day, it didn't get executed till PP, which is a state-owned enterprise, took it over. And they pretty much became the leverage basket. They took that risk, on the leverage. And because no international company or investor were willing to take that long-term risk, because obviously these risks are long-term, and 7-10 years if you look at infrastructure outside of tollways. Again, tollways is a different case, I think. But so to that point, as the view of the private sector, we would always want a shot at these infrastructure projects, right? But at the end of the day, who can take that risk? You know what I'm saying? Exactly. And those long-term risks. And this is, I think, where the angle of the Indonesian government is looking at with these sovereign wealth funds, is that it's a matter of taking these long-term risks, 10-year financing, 15-year financing, and the whole lot. And then there's ways to basically refinance and all that stuff. So those are structures that are developed, and so my personal view is, I'm the private sector guy. We can do business in other sectors that are more fast moving, like digital economy, for example. There's a lot of opportunities there in services sector. So the big infrastructure ones, I can understand the government's angle on it. Obviously, again, from the Kadin perspective or the private sector perspective, we always want a shot at it. That's always but again, can we handle the risk, the Indonesian private sector angle? Can we handle that risk? And that's I think where the angle is coming from. So I don't have a negative view about it. I'm quite positive, actually, if they can pull it off. And we'll see what happens. What I heard, though, there's a lot of also opportunities in renewable energy. And that might be interesting to look into, because of the energy mix that Indonesia needs to achieve on renewable energy. So that's my angle, Pak Shoeb, and I'm mostly sharing with you from a
Sure.
personal view. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I think on the renewable energy, if I may get Lin back on. Of course, American companies are one of the leaders in renewable energy. I mean, of course, the other would be China. But do American companies see Indonesia as a market for renewable energy? Despite, I mean, it is a major coal producer. And we had a earlier panel too who talked about sustainable finance for such projects, where there is more interest in financing what I call ESG projects, Do you, Lin, do you see American companies getting excited in this field?
Well, again, there's a kind of historical baggage that Indonesia is going to have to overcome to get that excitement back. A few years ago, when there was a push into renewable energy, this is under President Jokowi, and the announcement was made that you could go in and you could invest in these renewables in areas. You could even make deals to sell the electricity off grid if you made a deal with the bupatis, and there was a big opportunity there. And I remember being I joined a investment mission that the U.S. Embassy organized, and there must have been 30 or 40 companies from small innovative startups to major players who joined that. And the frustration came down to 3 letters: PLN. Mm-hmm. And those of us who've been in Indonesia for a while know exactly what I mean by that. And things got all gummed up, and very few deals were done. We have had that wind farm up in North Sulawesi, and we've got a handful of other things. But the experience left a sour taste in the mouth of a lot of American alternative or renewable energy providers. And it's simply that PLN dominates so much, and they set the agenda, and they want to buy they want to buy power or get power from traditional power plants. That's the way they've been wired up. And if there isn't an ability to privatize parts of the grid so that truly innovative solutions can take place, especially in Eastern Indonesia, then I think the renewable appetite will have a hard time coming back. You have good geothermal deposits here, but you've had trouble in that sector as well. You've had major energy companies sell out of their geothermal work because, again, becomes difficult. So I think, it's one thing, and I understand what George is saying about the role of the SOEs in certain parts of the economy. We all know why the SOEs dominated the big infrastructure push the last 5 years, because the president just wanted something easy and fast, basically. And that left the private infrastructure companies out in the cold for the most part. But something's got to be done, in my view, about PLN, Pertamina, to some extent PGN, to get their foot off the neck of the ability of smaller projects to get going and to show what can be done. And I think if that happens, I think you could have some very exciting things happening in renewables. But I don't think you can expect a traditional massive SOE to lead the drive for alternative renewable sources of energy when they have to face their bottom line. And if the bottom line is satisfied by coal, they're going to go coal or diesel or whatever, or biodiesel now. And precisely that gets back, as simple as anything else, back to the question of how corruption is defined. If you are causing state losses because you're taking a risk on some alternatives that might carry a risk, you can lose your job or worse for corruption. So I think something has to be built into the system that allows greater risk and greater innovation in those areas. And if that happens, American companies are poised to do a lot of business in renewables, and they'd like to do it in Indonesia because it's such a huge market. But the ability to make those deals hasn't been there yet, as far as I know. Now, maybe some big deal will be announced tomorrow, and I'll be proven wrong. I certainly hope so.
We'll all be.
It hasn't. We haven't seen it yet.
Right.
But boy, we had a lineup of companies coming through and knocking on our doors a few years ago, and they didn't come back, unfortunately, most of them.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we're going to wrap up soon. Maybe I'll go around the panel again, just to give to maybe give two or 3 minute wrap up on how do you see Indonesia? Let's say if you were to from 1 to 10 in terms of the investment possibility and the investment excitement from the foreign business community into Indonesia. Where does Indonesia stand today, and how do you see 2021? Maybe I'll start with Ambassador Gurjit.
Thank you. I would put it at a 6, and that's pretty high. But I would just like to draw attention to two things. You mentioned solar. There is something called the International Solar Alliance located in India, and we are waiting for Indonesia to sign up. The second, there is a very strong movement in India for social impact investment, investment to promote SDGs. And the Frontier Fund of Avishkar actually invests in Indonesia as well. So if you're looking for investment and to achieve the SDGs, I think the impact investment movement is a good place for India and Indonesia to work together. And those guys don't look so much at the scorecard we are rating today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Joel.
My score would be a little bit higher than Ambassador Gurjit's. I deal a lot with venture capital and tech investment. There's certainly a lot of enthusiasm and hype. You referred to it as smart money, Shoeb. I'm not sure how much I agree with you. These are investors who are investing in companies that are still loss-making and have been for the last decade. But I'd rank it at 8, and I suspect that even that might be lower than what my venture capital clients and colleagues would view Indonesia.
Thank you, Lin.
Well, I lost it.
No, Lin.
Oh, Lin, I thought you said Jim. Sorry.
We're gonna give Castle the last word, I'm sure. Well, those venture capital guys, they lack common sense, but they certainly do have a lot. They're certainly exciting. And I say that as somebody who loves Grab because my stepson works for them, and he's treated extremely well. But anyway, I think I'm more on Ambassador Gurjit's 6. I think there's always great potential. I'm very, very pleased with the engagement that we're getting from the government, with the amount of input we're being asked to give, with the attitude of the government towards investment. I'm still concerned about things like kind of phantom announcements that all the pharmaceutical companies, U.S. pharmaceutical companies in China are moving to Central Java. That kind of stuff is not helpful. And it's not helpful to go to companies and demand that they invest in a certain way. But I think that as the Indonesian officials learn how to deal with the companies in areas like pharmaceuticals and headway in education, et cetera, I think we could be poised for a very good 2021, and 6 for me is quite bullish. I think we'll do pretty well. The last thing I would say is please put your mind together and realize that remediation efforts on the pandemic are an investment issue. It's not like we have the economy over here and the pandemic over there. And this is one thing where we've had this kind of specious choice, and it's not a choice. And the the pandemic response is going to hurt Indonesia's recovery and confidence, at least for U.S. investors, I think. So that's another area where the two things really have to be joined, and I think they will get there. Indonesia always gets there. Sometimes it just takes a little longer than we would like. We have to learn. I've been in Indonesia long enough to be patient. Not as long as Jim, but long enough to be patient.
Okay, George.
Yes, so I'm going to be a bit controversial, maybe. I'll go with Joel at 8.
Oh.
And 2021. Well, I mean, if we get it right, we could, go to 9. Now, here's the justification of that. Let me justify that. Number one, I'm seeing the traffic and enthusiasm from Australia is there because obviously we have the economic cooperation agreement, and so I see like in the digital, I see increase of investments. Actually, a group like Tap Group that I see that I'm in, I have a observation with is their e-commerce. They're investing now. The angle would be is how. Australia, Singapore, US, and India, we can all work together with Indonesia and to build the ecosystem within that. And that's what the conversation, I think, was leading towards, a consolidation or a consortium of collaborations. Now, that's why, again, 2021 looks positive, but what Lin said is true. The pandemic issue is going to be a sort of a drawback, and we have to figure out how to not only manage it, but also how to build the narrative, right, of how we're managing it, and I think that confidence level needs to be built, and so I would say that despite all that, I noticed the attraction and the opportunities and the attraction of international investors are there, including from Australia and even from Singapore, and we're happy with the US. And in fact, with India, I think the whole IORA, whole IORA, the Indian Ocean cooperation, that could be a significant play in the future, the south of our southern coast, the South Seas. So we'll see what happens, but I'll go with Joel 8, and hopefully we dream from now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, George. Jim, you started the conversation. I'll give you an opportunity to
the gap in the numbers reflects Indonesia. It's in the eye of the beholder. It's in what sector you're interested in. Horses for courses. If I was in the digital economy, Indonesia is one of the most exciting places in the world. I think it's just, and that's why I know Joel is very active in that space.
Yes.
And I'm sure that's a major reason for your optimism, because it's a great place to be. If I was in some of the more traditional sectors, I'd be more concerned. If I was in the resource sector, I'd be crying. So it's horses for courses. So what I tell, if I'm talking to an Indonesian policymaker, I'm going to say, you can't have a protected economy and a productive economy. You've got to look at the areas where you can open up, and you've got to relax a little bit about interchange with the rest of the world. And I see this in the Indonesia-Australia CEPA agreement, in RCEP. Indonesia is joining these agreements, and these will have consequences, positive consequences. So if that's what I would say to an Indonesian. If I was saying to if I was talking to a foreign investor, I would say, look, Indonesia is the 4th biggest country in the world. You need to have an Indonesia strategy. Either you're in the country or you're not. How are you dealing with it? You probably are not in it in as big a way as you'd like to be because of the restrictions, but you're there. If you're not in it, why aren't you in it? How can you get in it? What would have to change to bring you into it? And this is an area where we need a dialogue with the government. This is an area that some aspects of the Omnibus bill are trying to address. So there is movement in the right direction. I can't say, I mean, if you're in the resource sector, I mean, let's talk about smelters. I think that's a disastrous program outside of the nickel smelting, which makes sense. Indonesia's drive to be part of the electric car makes great sense. It's a great program. Its demand to have onshore copper processing is a huge mistake. Forcing international investors to divest is a huge mistake. That money could be better used elsewhere. Remember, as a government, you've got the golden share. You get tax. You get 30% right off the top. I can remember when Prime Minister Mahathir came here in a farewell tour when he was back into his 60s as a young man, 70s. I guess he was just 70 then. He gave a talk at ASEAN, an ASEAN meeting in Bali, ASEAN summit in Bali. It was his last speech, last tour as Prime Minister in that round. And he said, my investment strategy or my investment plan for Indonesia or for Malaysia is simple. Come to Malaysia, make money, give me 20%. Don't make money, don't call me. Okay? That's your investment strategy. Come to Indonesia, make money, pay your taxes, follow the rules, we'll be good friends. If you don't make money, work harder next time. So I think what we need to do is have a more open dialogue about the 21st century. And I think this omnibus bill, if the government starts to communicate the logic behind the changes in a much better way, can be a way to start that dialogue with the public, because this is very much needed. I'll close by saying one thing that worries me. Indonesia, a few months after the 2019 election, the new government launched the most radical reform program since early 21st century, since 2002. None of those programs were mentioned in the election campaign.
Yes.
None of those changes were communicated to the public because the government, all the candidates were afraid to talk about that kind of change. That's a real burden to make change. You've got to persuade people, you've got to communicate. The government can no longer dictate from top down. They have to communicate and persuade. That's really something that's lacking, and in all the political parties. And I hope they can help be a part of the change by being more active in communicating on policy changes and what's needed to really bring Indonesia from a 6 to an 8 to a 9 and to a 10. So I'd like to close on that. We're not there yet, but some sectors are very close.
Thank you very much, Jim. I think we're on that very positive note, but also I think it's kind of an eyes wide open note for investors coming into Indonesia. There are lots of opportunities, but you really need to know what you're doing and the sectors that you want to invest in. And I think you're very right in terms of the ability of the government to communicate public policy, I think is severely lacking. I mean, I'm in communications, and I never see a really good statement or a strategy to communicate coming out of the government. So thank you very much, everybody. Ambassador Gurjit, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Joel, George, Lynn, thank you very much. And of course, our advisor, Jim Castle, always a pleasure to have you. You're always great. Thank you so much. On that note, we'd like to close the Indonesia Economic Forum. For the 7th annual Indonesia Economic Forum, we've had great 3 days, some very, very inspiring, some very thought-provoking discussions. We've had a broad range of issues discussed over the 3 days. Again, I'd like to thank each and every one of you who have joined us, who have participated, who have sent us questions. A big, big thank you for making this probably the best Indonesia Economic Forum so far. I also like to thank all our speakers. This year we had speakers from around the world. We had professors dialing in at 4 a.m. from the United States. Of course, late at night, we had speakers from Australia, we had speakers from India, we had speakers from Singapore. It was, in my view, one of the best sessions we have so far. I'd also like to thank, apart from our partners, the team behind the Indonesia Economic Forum. I'm the only one who you see up front every day for the last 3 days. You might be tired of me by now. But I also like to thank my team at the Indonesia Economic Forum, my co-partner and my co-founder, Sachin Gopalan, who's worked tirelessly. He's chaired some sessions, but he's worked tirelessly behind the scene to ensure a very smooth running of the show. Also, our social media and promotion team led by Haris Abdullah, great job in terms of reaching out, I think, so much broadly than ever before. My communications team with Yossi and Claudia and Shara, who have done a marvelous job in terms of communicating to both the speakers as well as to the audience. And lastly, I'd also like to thank my EO and my partners at Groovy, who have done a great job in running this virtual studio over the last 3 days. They've been wonderful. I'd like to thank them very much for a job well done. Jenny and her team, and of course, the team that has worked with me, and I think must be quite tired of me by now over the last 3 days. I've been seeing them for 8 hours a day. I'd like to thank Aubrey, Unica, and the team there for doing a great job. Thank you very much. God bless. We'll be back soon. I think the last message from me is Indonesia is the land of opportunity. It really needs patient capital, but I think at the end of the day, it requires a little bit of understanding and a commitment to the country. If you are committed to the country will be good to you. Thank you very much. See you soon. God bless.
Things are looking up. Your business is growing. So what's your next step? A bigger office? A new supplier? Your next big contract overseas? Your business has growing needs. You'll need more support, more flexibility, more resources, and a bank that makes it their business to help expand your business. Welcome to Business Banking with HSBC. All our experience and expertise brought right to you so that you and your business can take the next step. You'll have support from a dedicated relationship manager and access to our global network of experts. The flexibility to manage your finances across multiple devices. International accounts all on one platform. And much more. So choose Business Banking with HSBC and take your next step.
Dimana shock dari COVID ini betul-betul memukul dan kemampuan kita untuk mengcounternya tidak bisa menetralisir cukup besar.
Memprioritaskan kesehatan bukan berarti mengorbankan ekonomi. Sekali lagi, kita harus mencari keseimbangan yang pas.